In the United States, the story of media isn't just about technology. It's about power, influence, and the battle for the American mind.
So beautiful, it enhances any decor.
At its core, the media refers to various channels and organizations used to communicate information to the public.
Pucho, this is the easy listening spot on your dial.
Sometimes, people say the media when they mean mainstream media, big, established, traditional outlets with national or global reach. Other times, it's a catch-all term for anyone sharing information with a public audience. Few forces have reshaped the national conversation like the rise of the media, influencing not only what we talk about, but how we see the world. And the story is still being written. In the early 1900s, long before Americans gathered around radios or television sets, they flocked to movie theaters for newsreels, short, silent films that delivered images of war, politics, and national events. These newsreels didn't just inform, they shaped how Americans saw their nation and the world, crafting a shared narrative of patriotism, progress, and power. Even as radio made its way into American homes in the 1920s and 30s, newsreels remained a vital part of public life, offering dramatic, carefully curated glimpses of current events. Radio transformed national communication. Families sat together listening to fireside chats from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, live broadcasts of breaking news, and serialized dramas that carried powerful cultural messages between the entertainment.
We were held up, Tom. 3 men. They took the Flying V payroll and headed up toward Pine Gap, and they took Uncle with them.
For the first time, a president spoke directly into the homes of millions, bypassing newspapers and local officials.
I propose to confer within the coming month.
The airwaves became a new battleground for ideas, control, and national identity.
Employers of labor.
Recognizing radio's growing influence, Congress passed the Communications Act of 1934, establishing the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to regulate radio broadcasts, telephone lines, and eventually television. The FCC's charge was to ensure broadcast license holders operated in the public interest, convenience, and necessity.
We all know that there are many don'ts in the laws we make.
In practice, this meant protecting powerful commercial interests and keeping potentially subversive ideas off the air.
Suppose this were you. What social controls affect you?
At the same time, motion pictures faced their own reckoning. Hollywood, increasingly accused of spreading immorality and radical politics, responded by creating the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America in 1922, later renamed the MPAA. Under the leadership of Will Hays, the MPAA introduced the Hays Code in the 1930s, banning profanity, nudity, interracial relationships, sympathetic depictions of criminals, and criticism of religion or authority. This wasn't just about decency, it was about control, ensuring movies reflected a narrow, conservative vision of America and keeping controversial political ideas off the screen. As tensions with the Soviet Union escalated in the late 1940s, mass media became a frontline weapon in the Cold War. Films, radio broadcasts, and public service announcements warned of communist spies, labor agitators, and un-American ideas lurking in schools, churches, and neighborhoods. Hollywood studios, eager to avoid boycotts and government crackdowns, blacklisted writers, actors, and directors suspected of communist ties.
John Howard Lawson refused to answer the question, "Are you a member of the Communist Party?"
The media industry worked hand in hand with government efforts to root out dissent. Words like communism, socialism, and radicalism became powerful political weapons, not always used to describe genuine ideology, but to label and discredit anyone challenging social, economic, or racial hierarchies.
But most of them stick to their testimony. Without the help of these people, the committee would have a really hard time of it.
By the end of the 1950s, television had overtaken radio and film newsreels as America's primary source of information and entertainment. Anchors like Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite came to embody a new kind of national authority, trusted voices in an era when control over what Americans saw and heard still lay in the hands of a few tightly regulated gatekeepers. This tightly managed media landscape would dominate American life for decades, laying the groundwork for the battle over culture, politics, and power still being fought in modern mass media today. By the start of the 1960s, American mass media had become a fixture in daily life. Television sets filled living rooms, bringing news, entertainment, and political messages directly into people's homes. Increasingly, those messages were in color, adding a new dimension to how audience experienced the world beyond their walls. Television programming of the early decade promoted a carefully sanitized suburban version of America, where families were white, fathers were providers, mothers kept house, and disruptive social realities were left out of the frame.
Starring the entire Nelson family. Here's Ozzie.
Shows of the time reflected and reinforced mainstream American values. Diversity, racial tensions, and political controversy were carefully avoided, while escapism ruled the primetime hours.
Here they are, America's favorite family, the Nelsons.
But outside the television screen, the country was erupting. The civil rights movement gained national attention through striking images of peaceful protests met with violence, televised for the world to see. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. recognized the power of mass media, strategically staging marches and demonstrations where cameras could capture the contrast between peaceful protesters and brutal authorities. This public pressure forced the hand of politicians, leading to the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, landmark laws that came in part because of the country's unavoidable media images.
After which the mourners demonstrated their grief before the White House and the press.
At the same time, the Vietnam War became the first fully televised conflict. Nightly news broadcasts brought footage of battle and casualties into American homes, eroding support for the war and inspiring a massive anti-war movement. Government, fearing loss of public support, increased its control over war reporting and invested in propaganda campaigns, painting protesters as unpatriotic and Vietnamese enemies as savage threats. Politicians mastered the language of television. Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 campaign deployed the famous Daisy ad, a terrifying image of nuclear annihilation designed to portray his opponent as a danger to America.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
It lasted less than a minute, but changed political advertising forever, demonstrating how fear could be packaged into a single powerful image. Culture, too, was in flux. In 1964, the Beatles arrived in America, sparking the British invasion and ushering in a new era of youth culture that celebrated rebellion, music, and individualism.
Two, with a gross of $17 million last year.
The music of the decade carried its own messages. Artists like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Marvin Gaye turned songs into protests, soundtracks for civil rights, peace, and social justice.
Picket lines, picket signs, punish me with brutality. Talk to me, honey, so you can.
Music became a messenger, channeling the hopes, frustrations, and demands of a generation who wanted more from their country than war and conformity. Woodstock in 1969 became a defining moment, a mass gathering of young Americans rejecting war, injustice, and traditional values. Mainstream media coverage attempted to diminish the festival's political impact, portraying it as mere hedonism. Meanwhile, The women's rights movement pushed into the national spotlight, with media often reducing their demands to novelty stories, while politicians worked to resist legislation on pay equity, abortion, and workplace rights.
Every girl is raised to be a housewife and a mother. She is not raised to be something other than that.
Feminist leaders like Gloria Steinem used print and television media to challenge traditional gender roles and expose systemic inequalities in politics, the workforce, and at home. Behind the scenes, broadcast owners and politicians tightened their grip. The FCC's fairness doctrine required stations to present balanced coverage on controversial issues. But in practice, it allowed networks to decide which voices were responsible enough to be heard. Media owners and political strategists worked together to shape public opinion, limit dissent, and portray social movements as dangerously radical or un-American.
Makeup and costumes were bizarre.
Cold War propaganda still flooded the airwaves, teaching children to fear nuclear attack and reinforcing the idea that questioning authority meant siding with the enemy.
Duck and cover. Duck and cover.
By the end of the 1960s, American mass media had become a powerful tool for both social change and social control, a battleground where politicians, corporate owners, and activists fought to define the nation's future, one image at a time.
Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.